Legit Cool Podcast.
Citizens of America. People of the Florida Alliance. And the Western forces of Texas and California will be welcomed back to these United States as soon as their illegal secessionist government is deposed.
You don't know what side they're fighting for.
Someone's trying to kill us. We are trying to kill them.
From filmmaker Alex Garland comes a journey across a dystopian future America following a team of military-embedded journalists as they race against time to reach DC before rebel factions descend upon the White House. What's up, folks? Welcome to Legit Cool Podcast, the ultimate destination for movie enthusiasts, pop culture experts. We dive deep into the world of cinema and embark on an exciting journey through the latest blockbusters, hidden gems, and timeless classics. My name is River Villi, the founder of this podcast. I normally have other guests on the show, such as JC, Nath, Tony Ook, but I am on my own today, just for this one. And today I'm reviewing and recapping the so-called blockbuster hit. Actually, maybe I'm just throwing so-called blockbuster hit. I don't know. I just hear a lot about this film being such a great film, and people talk a lot about it. There's a lot of whirlwind opinions, and some a little bit divided. But I think for the vast majority of people, at least according to the consensus off of Rotten Tomatoes, people are saying this is an incredible film. And the film that I'm talking about, reviewing and recapping today on episode 85, is Civil War. And unfortunately, this is not the same Civil War as Captain America Civil War that came out in 2016, although I wish Steve Rogers or any of the Avengers showed up in this film. Because, this is an interesting one. Alex Garland, for those of you who are familiar with this director, he directed films such as Men, Annihilation, Ex Machina, and I haven't seen any of those three films, but I definitely know quite a bit about them. Just primarily from people that have seen them, and a lot of people really love Ex Machina. It's super popular, and even especially amongst film people. So this might seem like a cardinal sin for a film person like myself, but I don't care. I haven't seen it, and I do plan on seeing it, but maybe, I don't know, after watching Civil War. People talk about Men, saying that that's quite good. It's his latest film, which I believe came out last year or in the last couple of years. And he's also quite well known for being the main writer and the only writer on all of his films. He's written obviously these films here, Men, Annihilation, and Ex Machina. But he's also a popular writer in amongst other films that are kind of popular. 28 Days Later was quite a bit of a hit, and that was from Danny Boyle. Also another kind of smaller indie filmmaker, almost like in the between indie filmmaker and blockbuster filmmaker. Alex Garland's kind of like that. He was the writer for 28 Days Later, a movie called Sunshine, which is probably a film that a lot of people don't know or have never heard about. But that was actually the first film that I saw Cillian Murphy in. Kind of an odd one, that film. Well, to be honest, I can't really remember anything of that movie, Sunshine. And Alex Garland is also the writer of Dread, the film that came out the Carl Urban remake, I believe. Or I could be wrong. No, I think it is the Carl Urban remake. This movie was musically composed by two composers, and also the two same composers that pretty much do every single Alex Garland film. That is Jeff Barrow and Ben Salisbury. The DOP is also a common compadre, colleague of Alex Garland and all of his films that he's been on as well, and his name is Rob Hardy. This film, Civil War, stars Kirsten Dunst, Wagner Moura, I believe that's how you pronounce it, Kaylee Spaney, Nick Offerman, Jefferson White, and Nelson Lee. This movie has a runtime of 1 hour and 49 minutes. Why couldn't it have been 1 hour and 50? Why 49? The budget for this film was the highest budget film for a A24 film. And if you're familiar with A24, they make these kind of fancy indie cult films. No, sorry, not indie cult films, but sort of fancy indie, smaller budget films. But this is the most expensive film that A24 has ever done. And this was a budget of $50 million. And as of today's recording, which is April 29th, this movie has only made $71.6 million in the box office worldwide. Now that is pretty disastrous considering this movie came out April 12th. You know, we're coming into almost a month of its release and it's only made $20 million above its initial budget. That's not a good sign. I don't see this movie having legs. I think it's actually dropping in box office numbers as the weeks go by. So there's not a lot of promise for this to make a lot of, like a ton of money. Yeah, maybe deserves it. So yes, this movie has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 81% from the critics and 71% from the audience. Do I agree that it's 81, 71? I don't agree that it's 81. 71 is a little closer to what I would give this movie. However, the critics' consensus on this, according to Rotten Tomatoes, is it's a, quote, tough and unsettling by design. Civil War is a gripping close-up look at the violent uncertainty of life in a nation in crisis, unquote. Wait, I don't know why I quoted that. It's not really a quote. It's just a consensus from critics on Rotten Tomatoes. But yeah, nonetheless, if you've seen this movie, then this spoiler heavy review and recap is going to be no surprise to you. But if you haven't seen this film and you are sort of on the fence of wanting to see this film and you're wanting to just listen to what my opinion of this film is, then obviously by all means you're more than welcome to stick around and listen to this. But if you lean towards wanting to see this film, I would say this to you right now. It is worth watching, maybe not at the cinema. I would say this is more of a straight to stream type film. I don't think you need to waste your pennies going to see this film in a big cinema. Although there are some action set pieces that are kind of extraordinary to see in a big cinema, I don't think it's enough to justify you having to pay that money and time to go see it in the cinema. I think you should wait for it to be streamed, and I think this is kind of like a Netflix production type film. I don't think it deserves to be in the cinema for a lot of reasons that I will get into when we get through to the recap. So in that sense, and if you're sort of leaning towards you don't really care about seeing this film and you're just more interested in hearing what I have to say about this, then stick around. Listen to what I have to say about this. I'm going to dive deep, as we normally promise in this podcast, dive deep into the nitty gritty, the details of what makes this film good or bad or somewhere in between. Now I'm going to start off with my initial review and recap. Sorry, not the recap. I'm going to start off with my initial review, give you my first impressions, give you some highs and lows, how I think the director performed in this, how I think some of the performances from the characters also went in this film as well. So, before I get into this, I'm just going to take a sip of my coffee. And I wanted to mention that I'm drinking coffee because I don't want to sound like I'm some random sounds in the background while I'm talking about this film. But yeah, I'm drinking coffee, and it's like 7:40 p.m. Some might actually find that a little bit weird, but I don't think it's weird. Whatever. I like drinking coffee whenever, and I can sleep well at night. Go figure. So, what did I think of this movie? I think this movie is a wasted opportunity to tell some gripping, deep stories that are character driven, showing some interesting takes into what kind of dystopian world this is. It's a missed opportunity for a lot of those reasons. And it's really difficult to know what Alex Garland was trying to go for in this film. It's really difficult to understand what is the purpose behind him having this demonstration or display of a dystopian world that has been sanctioned. Wait, sorry, not sanctioned, but has been created. This dystopian world has been created by. It's all stemmed from just poor political decisions from the president, and the president has sort of created this big divide in the country, and it's really difficult to know what kind of message that Alex Garland is trying to elicit, and I think that's by design. I think that's on purpose. He clearly wanted to not have a side, a quote unquote side, like, you know, whether you sit on the political right or the political left, which is primarily the two polarizing sides in politics, in both public, in both public discourse and also in sort of, you know, private friendship discourse, whatever. There's two opposing groups, and I think he deliberately didn't want to show which side he was on because he kind of throws you off thinking. He throws you off with a lot of these different sort of subplots to the film, or you can call them vignettes of the film. There's a lot of different places that they go to that are kind of like different vignettes, and you could say that, you know, going from one town to another throughout the film. And he deliberately throws you off with your ideology, whatever ideology you have, and presuppositions and predispositions coming into this film. But ultimately, like, the thing that quite makes it empty for me is that when we get to the end of the film, it doesn't feel like there's any, like, the conclusion of the film doesn't necessarily feel like that's what it was leading up to, because I think, at least from my interpretation, we're led in this long journey with so many questions that don't necessarily get answered. Like, at all. I don't think there's even an attempt to answer any of these questions. And then the finale, or the conclusion, is empty. It's not satisfying because it doesn't really the movie doesn't show you or hint at anything to do with what the ending is. And I'm just going to say it right off the bat, and especially for those who are sticking around listening to this review, what the ending is, if you don't really care what the ending is. And of course, if you've seen this movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the assassination of the president, played by Nick Offerman. So I understand why the assassination happens. The reason why I feel like it's an empty story is because there's no build up, or there's no narrative build up to that moment. And you could probably say, well, the movie is about a dystopian, messed up society of America, that of course the inevitability was to assassinate the president. It's like, well, I don't think that actually the movie does anything to tell that type of story. I think the movie just really shows us the repercussions of such bad policy and bad decisions or bad executive decisions from the president. It doesn't, there's no way that any of that is alluding to the lead up to the assassination of the president. So I think the movie displays this super stylistic, beautiful cinematography, great action set pieces of a documentary. So, like, that's usually my takeaway with these types of films. And there's quite a few films that are kind of like this. Like I remember The Tree of Life has beautiful cinematography, great imagery, but it just reminds me of what a documentary would be if you added splashes of great cinematography and great imagery. And I feel like Civil War is doing that. I don't think it's telling you a classic narrative structure that you wouldn't find in all films, that Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 structure. And when you don't have that classic structure, what you do is, what tends to happen, and this is what happens in the film, is that you sacrifice character development, you sacrifice character depth, you sacrifice like some kind of coherent storytelling process. And if that is the case, that is by design, that this is the intention of Alex Garland, then I just don't think it qualifies as a great movie. When you have filmmakers that are trying to shake things up, shaking things up doesn't necessarily mean you destroy the structure of what makes a film, like the DNA that creates a film, the skeleton, the bones, the bones of the film. And the meat is just all the creativity that you put on top of it. If you destroy that, what are you left with? Nothing, really. And that's why I give the analogy or the example of a documentary, because a documentary is nowhere near the identical or similar to a film, because the structure isn't the same as telling a story in a film, or just creating a film. Okay, so that's kind of how I feel about this film. It's styly, like I can tell you some cool points about the film, which, yeah, cinematography is great, styly, it's great. The characters that are played by Julia, I was going to say Julia Stiles, Kirsten Dunst, Kaylee Spaney, and Wagner Morrell, like these characters, or these actors playing these characters, like they're fine. They're just characters that are there to take us on this journey throughout America, and then like the purpose, or I guess the purpose of the characters, not really the purpose of the film, but the purpose of the characters is to get from east, like I guess from New York. Do they start in New York? Yeah, I think they start in New York. To get from east all the way to Washington, D.C. to get a last interview. That's the character's goal. Now, that's a classic trait to have in a film, is that when you have your main cast have a goal in mind, and so that's a good thing. That's a normal thing to have in a film, but everything else that is around it, or what is the thing, which is the story, isn't really quite there. And it's going back to what I was saying earlier on about the story and the narrative structure. They're just kind of there as sort of, walking, talking, plot devices, I suppose, to give us this journey through. So, like, in other words, you could have told the same story without having these characters. You could have just had a narrator going through the different parts of America, displaying these, what I said before, the vignettes. It's kind of like small stories throughout, like tiny stories throughout their journey, because these stories are just taking place in these small towns that they come across, to display the different perspectives of the war through the perspective of the locals in these towns. You could have just literally had a documentary about it, a stylized documentary, but I guess you can't do a documentary. By definition is also non-fiction, so I guess you can't do that, because obviously a civil war isn't going on in the US, although it seems like it when you see some of the videos on YouTube or social media. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, like these characters just don't have much meat and bones to the characters. They don't have much going on, like, and when they do have something going on, when certain characters say certain things, where they're displaying a sense of stress and depression, there's layers there, but but Alex Garland deliberately doesn't unpack those layers. And I think unpacking those layers would have created a sense of connection with the audience, so that anything bad that would happen to these characters, and I mentioned this in the podcast before, anything bad that would happen to these characters you'd have empathy and sympathy for these characters, and so you feel what they're going through, essentially, is what I'm saying. And you don't quite get that with any of these characters at all. There are some bizarre things that happen with some of the characters, like namely Joel. Joel has this moment where he just kind of has this very outlandish, explosive reaction to the death of Dave. Is it Dave? I think Jefferson White. No, that's not Dave. Nelson Lee, maybe. Sorry, I'm just clicking on these things. Okay, not Nelson Lee. I just didn't put it in in this cast list for these notes. But one of the journalists, it's a bigger guy, Black American bigger guy, who's very unfit for this journey, and he's kind of deliberately there to create moments of stress and anxiety because of his physical inability and slowness or whatever. Anyway, so he dies in the film, and Joel, the character Joel, just has this bizarre reaction to it, and it has this, again, this like styly slow-mo to it, camera shot. It's bizarre. I don't know why I get it, he worked with him in the past, and he's got history with him, and there's a bit of camaraderie there, but there are no moments in the film where Joel ever shows that kind of emotion, and I would even say he doesn't really show that kind of deep connection with that character. It's bizarre. I guess on one hand you could say that it's a compilation of emotions and stress that he's gone through, and it's been triggered by the death of that guy. Maybe you could say that, but I don't know. When you're singling out a film, you are criticizing the film itself. You don't try and, let's say, create non sequiturs just so that you can make sense of the characters. You simply judge and criticize the film for what's in the film, not what could have been in the film, to make that justification a little bit more, or make that bias feel or make more sense if you really love this film. Meaning you're sort of, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you could probably lie to yourself and create layers to this character and interpret it that way, but that's not the case with this. And don't do that. Just criticize and judge the film for what you get in the film. And so that was bizarre. There's also some bizarre things that happen with Lee, Kirsten Dunst's character, where she has this moment at the end where she's just so sheltered, and she is petrified, scared, and all the chaos that's happening outside the White House, or the raid that they're trying to do to the White House just outside of it. She is bizarrely so scared, and there is nothing in the film prior to that moment that shows that she would ever get to that point. And if anything, she's like this hardened case. She's sheltered in this like hard exterior because she's built up this toughness, this thick skin over her experience. From her experience being a war photographer. So it's so weird. I don't know why that's the case. Maybe one could say that, well, she's probably at the breaking point. But if that's the case, then why not show us that she's leading up to a breaking point? There is nowhere in the film where we see that there is slight cracks in that shell. There is that moment, that sort of heartfelt moment where it's they're out in some car park or whatever, and she's talking. She has this kind of random moment sitting on the couch staring into the distance, and there's a little bit of dialogue or like surrounding like that she's a bit vulnerable or she's a little bit jaded by some of these things. But I mean, come to think of it, I don't even think that they do that either. I don't know. Anyway, I just don't think that there's any point that hints us to Lee potentially going through that point, and then when we get to that point, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, I want to elaborate more on that when we get into the recap. But yeah, all these characters, they're just kind of okay. They're just doing their job. They're saying their lines, and these lines are kind of like meaningless, and these lines have like nothing to do with the story, because the film, again, doesn't really have a story. The story, you could say that the journey getting to the White House to interview the president, or do the final interview of the president, is the story, but that's not really the story. I mean, if that's the story, then okay, sure. But, I feel like that's just a small goal that a character has, and not prime story, right? It's like giving a goal to a main character, but the story is something bigger and greater, but it's contributing to that. So it's not like the central plot, but it's something that contributes to the central plot. And the central plot for this is kind of unknown. It's like, we don't really know what that is. And sometimes that comes down to what the director is thinking. Not sometimes, that's always coming down to what the director is thinking. And sometimes what the director is thinking may not necessarily translate accurately on screen. Yeah. So that's kind of how I felt about it. Did I talk about many highlights? No. I mean, I spoke about the cinematography, some of the artistry around that. Not a lot to take away from the characters. They're fine. Like, the performances are fine. They're believable in those situations. And I'm glad that this movie has a runtime of 1 hour, like shy of 2 hours, but it actually feels way longer than it should be, because there's a lot of just like stalemate scenes. There's a lot of just kind of hum-ho, how you going type scenes that are just not that interesting. Like, anytime the characters are just sitting around talking, the dialogue's very boring. It's uninteresting. But in good films, when there's a good, greater story, the dialogue has something to do with that greater story, but there's no greater story. And it's kind of, the proof is in the boring, lackluster dialogue. Yeah, I think that kind of paints a better picture, I guess, is just using the example of the characters and how they interact with each other. That's about it. They just talk about memories of the past and what, like, maybe some of, like, how things used to be, blah, blah, blah. That's really it. There you go. There's the proof of lack of story and substance. So, I'm going to get into the exciting part of this podcast episode. Like all the other episodes that we do, I am going to get into the recap. And just for those who it's your first time here on the podcast, the recap is a walk through the entire story from beginning to end. And this is our major opportunity, or I should say my major opportunity, to chime in and look at whether these things really worked in the film or they didn't work in the film. And then by the end of the recap, I may change my opinion on the film or I may not. But it's a good way to revisit the film in a way that combs through everything that I may have missed or just maybe reaffirming. So let's get into the plot. Okay, so in the beginning, there was light. No, okay. In the beginning, a civil war has erupted between an authoritarian United States government and various regional factions. The president, who is serving a third term, claims that victory is close at hand. Renowned war photographer Lee Smith, which is played by Kirsten Dunst, saves aspiring photojournalist Jesse Cullen from a suicide bombing in Brooklyn. Okay, so the opening of this film, it's actually quite cool. I like the frame and the focus and the, like, sort of the intense focus and blurred out parts of this frame on Nick Offerman. Kind of a cool shot, very like super close up, and I think this is to depict the intensity of the situation, being that close to the president, and also showing the I was gonna say trepidation, not really trepidation, but maybe showing that it's okay. Well, at least in an extreme close up on a character, this is an opportunity for the filmmaker to display deep senses of emotion or what the character is potentially going through. And I think Nick Offerman gives you that vibe. He gives you that performance where you're thinking, oh, I see some deception going on, but I also see some confidence. And this confidence and deception and lie, I guess, is an interesting it's sort of an interesting take to start off a film, because it's supposed to put the audience, or at least how I felt as an audience member, I was thinking, he does kind of give you that Stalin vibe. Why did I say, I think I said Stalin because he could play a Stalin because of his looks. Yeah, hey, maybe that's a magic casting right there if they make a Stalin. No, please don't make a Stalin film. Well, actually, no. It could be a good history lesson for a lot of people who don't know anything about totalitarianism and authoritarianism. Okay, anyway, I'm just blabbering. But yeah, nice, intense close-up, extreme close-up, because it depicts these kind of these layers of deception and confidence and fake leadership, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of cool. Then it cuts to city in New York and Brooklyn, and there's this crazy suicide bombing that happens, and it's so jarring. It comes out of nowhere. You have no idea why the suicide bombing happened, and this is kind of Alex Garland's way of launching the audience into the pit of despair. 10 points for those of you who know that reference. But yeah, he launches you into this pit of despair. It literally is, because there is no there's kind of an explanation. No, is there? No, I don't think there's an explanation at all after that. Like, it's purposely like that, because this is how we're going to get into what civil war is, and this is also your hint of holding back, withholding information about what this film potentially could be or where it's going to go. So it's a pretty jarring opening, but kind of a good opening. I'm kind of like, all right, I'm ready. I'm buckled up. I'm ready to take this film on. Lee and her colleague Joel intend to travel to Washington, D.C. to interview and photograph the president before the city falls. And I guess, mind you, we don't know, or we're not even expecting that the president is going to be assassinated. And I don't think the journalists are expecting that either. Lee's mentor, Sammy, that's his name, Sammy. Yeah, the guy that dies. Sammy asks to accompany them as far as Charlottesville, where the Western forces, quote, WF, of Texas. They missed an opportunity. They could have called it WTF, Western the Forces. Nah, stupid, take that back. Western forces of Texas and California are assembling. Despite Lee's hesitance, she and Joel agree. Unbeknownst to Lee, Jesse convinces Joel to take her with them as well. Now, this is one of those things that I was speaking about before when I was giving my first impression and my snapshot review of the film, is that Alex Garland deliberately throws the audience off guard by removing all your predispositions, presumptions, and political ideologies, because the two most opposite states, you could say, in the United States is Texas and California. And the fact that those two states have come together to rise up against this totalitarian government is a prime example of Alex going, I don't care about your political biases and opinions and positions. I'm going to throw you off and create the Western forces, which is kind of like a rebellion. It's kind of like the Star Wars equivalent rebellion to the Empire, which is the United States government. So I like that concept. It's pretty cool. And showing that assembly and all come together, whatever, and what they're willing to do. Now, the only thing that we don't really get to see about the Western forces is kind of like, how they came together and what are some of the dialogue sequences, what are some of the dialogues that they're exchanging with one another, a Texan person versus a California person. It probably would have been cool to see that, but again, it's not really in that film, and there's no exposition at all about the Western forces when it comes to individuals in this Western forces rebellion, whatever. Anyway, after departing the city, the group stops at a rural gas station protected by armed men and buys gas with Canadian dollars. Jessie wanders off to a nearby car wash where she finds two men being militia. Oh, whoops! I just skipped a whole bunch. Sorry. Jessie wanders off to a nearby car wash where she finds two men being tortured by the owners, who claim that the men are looters. One owner follows Jessie, but Lee diffuses the situation by taking a photo of the man posing with his victims. After leaving, Jessie berates herself for being too scared to take photos. Okay, so this scene, actually, like, before I get into this, just cut back a little bit when Jessie pretty much just she nudges her way into this little posse, or not posse, what I'm trying to say, this little group of extreme photographers or media people on a death wish, kind of like on a mission to whatever. What am I don't know what I'm trying to say. Jessie weasels her way through to be a part of the Lee's photography band members on this journey, and she wants to do this because she needs to find a way to start. And Sammy is kind of the reason for that, which begs me to think that Sammy's real reason or justification to be in this carpool with them was really to help Jessie be a part of this group, because he's kind of the mediator here. He's the one that's vouching for her to be in here because Jessie needs a place to start. And Lee, she's completely against it because she's too young. She's going to experience. She's going to die. And to Sammy's defense on behalf of Jessie, he has this cool line where he says, "Yeah, but you started somewhere. Everybody's got to start somewhere," and that's kind of true. And the reason why I say that this is Sammy's way of being in this group, or the reason why he's in this group, is because he doesn't really have anything else to do. He doesn't contribute to the skill set of the group. I guess he contributes by advising certain things, but the group goes against anything that he advises. He just goes along with the ride. It's kind of pointless in being there at all. I feel like his only reason to be there is to justify Jessie or back up Jessie's decision in being there. It's kind of weird. So yeah, they go to this gas station. I think this gas station is it's kind of the only way that depicts or helps develop Jessie's character. And I did say before that the characters are not developed at all, and I'm still going to stand by that. But I will say that Jessie's character has the most development out of all of them, which isn't really much. We learn about where she is. We learn about the things that she takes on and the experiences that she goes through throughout this film. And this is the first of many. Not many, but this is the first. First of a few instances that she does experience intense stress and intense trauma. So I feel like this scene is really an exercise to help develop Jessie's character and nothing else really. And I guess it is also to show more about the state of these areas and what these people are going through and what they're willing to go through. So I think it's kind of interesting in that respect, but it's also just kind of, like I said, very documentary-ish style. And then the other thing that's quite interesting in here as well is that, and it makes a lot of sense. The country is in complete turmoil. It's gone tits up. It's upside down. Its economic structures have completely collapsed, and you can only assume that it's only the rich and powerful people that still have some kind of powerful platform, because I'd imagine that's kind of how totalitarian states work. And then that's kind of made a bit more clear when Lee says, we'll give you cash, we'll give you 300. And then the guys that are holding the gas station, one of them says, that'll maybe get me a sandwich. In other words, it's worth nothing. But then she says Canadian dollars. So it's clear that Canada is probably just like the representation for the rest of the global economy, and the US is just stuck in this rut at the moment where everything is so bad, and of course the economy is going to go upside down as well. So that's kind of interesting. Or maybe he really loves Canadians. I don't know. No, it's more to do with the former. Following an overnight stop near ongoing fighting, the group documents the combat that... Oh, sorry. Let me start again. The group documents the combat the next day as militiamen assault a building held by loyalists. Lee sees Jesse's potential as a war photographer, while Jesse photographs the militia executing captured loyalist soldiers. Continuing on, the group spends the night at a refugee camp before passing through a small town where, under watchful guard, residents attempt to live in a blissful ignorance. Lee and Jesse grow closer, trying on clothes at the local shop. Okay, this little segment just mashed up a whole bunch of stuff in this, a whole bunch of scenes that were made up of about maybe 20 minutes of the film, maybe 15 minutes of the film. Let's start from the beginning of this little segment here. Following the overnight stop near the ongoing fighting, the group documents combat the next day, and the militiamen assault a building held by loyalists. So I guess the loyalists are the soldiers that are still loyal to the government, and the militiamen taking them down presumably are just the locals, the locals that are the resistance uprising against the loyalists and the government. And this scene is it's heavy. It's a really good action set piece. Like, there's a lot of gunfire. You can really feel the intensity behind like the machine guns and the rifles and whatever. It's really intense. But here's the thing that I don't understand about Alex Garland and his decisions as a director. I don't understand why he just throws in like funk, happy music in amongst this chaos. Now, directors that do a good job at throwing that type of creative decision for juxtaposition reasons, and the juxtaposition kind of works because it's a contrast to allude to maybe a thought process that the character's going through or something like that. He just kind of throws it in amongst this chaotic battle sequence, but I don't understand. I don't interpret why it's there. It's so bizarre. The whole film, the theme of this film is, it's dark, it's depressing, it's dystopian life. Like, nobody wants to be in this life. It's dark, and so for him to just throw in this like funk, it's like I don't know, funk, disco, electro, or something. It was so happy and thing. And I love it when directors and writers can throw in creative spanners, but this doesn't tell me that. It's just a bizarre thing to throw in there. I'm still kind of scratching my head. Why did he decide to do that? It's weird. It's super weird. And I think it happens another time in the film, but I can't remember. Maybe the recap's going to show me that. Or help me remind that second part if it's there. But yeah, it's just bizarre. And the slow-mo sequences where it goes back into Jesse's POV through a camera and she's taking these photos. Yeah, it's good, but it's just bizarre. It's hard to kind of grasp how real these well, no, I shouldn't say that. It does feel real. Like a lot of these situations do feel like a real scenario, but these creative decisions around putting random like happy music in there is I don't know. If anything, it just takes me away. It takes me out of these scenes that are supposed to be intense and depressing, and feel for these people in there. I don't know. Maybe I should hit him up and ask him why. Why do you have this electro funk music in it? Yes. So then the group move on to the small town, and I don't think we get to know what the small town is, but it is like the recap says. It's sort of blissful ignorance in amongst the residents, and they walk into like a clothing store, or maybe it's like a thrift store or something, secondhand store, and the lady behind the counter, she's just like by herself, the only one working there. She just says, "Hi, how's it going?" As if, nothing's going on out there. And our main characters are kind of like, "Do you realize what's going on out there?" And then she replies by saying, "Yeah, of course. But, we stay out of it and we pretend like nothing's going on. And we just protect ourselves." Is essentially is what she's saying. And then at the end of this sequence, we actually see that they're actually not completely oblivious and bliss. Well, they're bliss, but they're not oblivious. They're not oblivious to what's going on, because they have people in like watchtowers or above the building that are like sniper. They're on the lookout. They're on the watch, is I guess what they call it in the military term. They're on the watch. So they're very aware. They just want to protect themselves from that. They create their own little silo, I suppose, and make sure that they're protecting themselves by people in shifts and rotation, whatever. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I could actually, can I see that happening in real life? Maybe there are some towns out there that are just like, let's stay away from that kind of shit. I think that kind of exists in any country as it stands, even if like the country's all safe and everything's kind of fair, so to speak. There's a lot of towns that just like to stay away from all the big city stuff, is probably how they would call it. Later, they are pinned down in a sniper battle amid the remains of a Christmas fair. The snipers, they are with mock Joel's attempts to ascertain which party they are fighting for or against, telling Joel that they and the sniper in a nearby house are simply trying to survive. Jessie's nerve builds and her photography skills improve as she witnesses several deaths and deploys a mentorship under Lee. Jessie asks if Lee would photograph Jessie being killed, and Lee responds, "What do you think?" implying she might. I totally forgot that line. Now that line makes a little bit more sense when we get to the end where Lee does die. Spoiler alert. Anyway, I've already said spoilers already. While driving, the foursome encounter the two other reporters they know as Tony and Bohai. Tony and Jessie playfully switch vehicles, only for Bohai and Jessie to be captured by militants who are dumping civilian corpses in a mass grave. The rest of the group tries to intervene, but a xenophobic militant kills Bohai and asks where the others are from, killing Tony when he says Hong Kong. Sammy saves the group by running over two militants, but is shot by a third and dies as they flee. Okay, so this whole scene, by the way, the militant is, I don't think he has a name. Yeah, no, he doesn't have a name. It's played by Jesse Plemons. And Jesse Plemons is an awesome actor. I think this guy he's continually on the way up, and he continually impresses me with all the smaller roles or sort of the side character roles that he plays. But he's awesome. Great actor. And I want to see him do more. I reckon this guy could kill it in a main role if you give him the right role. Anyway, so Jesse Plemons playing this xenophobic militant who deliberately hates like non-American people. Like all his lines are all about asking and inquiring whether you're an American or not. And your answer is going to determine your fate. Okay? So if you're not American, then you're dead. Pretty simple, pretty black and white. No pun intended for Jesse Plemons' character. But And he does a great job at portraying this character. My issue is, I'm like, man, don't get Jesse Plemons to play this character. Like, get him to play something. Maybe even get him to be one of the main cast members, because I think he would have done better. Yeah. Anyway, so Jesse Plemons plays this character, and he does a great job at being this hardcore racist dude. And I think that this is also one of those kind of makes me think like, even though Alex Garland is deliberately trying to throw you off with audio or your like predisposed political ideologies and positions, it does make me think like he does clearly have an opinion about who's who and who are some of these people that do exist in the United States, like in the real life. And I guess there are like a lot of these people out there. But it makes me think, okay, why? It makes me want to ask the question, why would you put this part? Because it seems quite like you would presume that this would be quite important for him. That's hence why it's in the film. Kind of makes me think he has a strong opinion about certain racist people and racism as a general thing in the US, because he puts it in the film. Anyway, it's just something that I observed. Yeah, and I think the scene is good, but the thing that threw me off was the car racing in and hitting Jesse Plemons and his compatriots. It's so bizarre because I'm like, you would have heard this car from a mile away, because it's going at like, I don't know, like 60 kilometers an hour, like 60, 80, it's going pretty fast to hit him, like, because he's just trying to put pedal to the metal, like he's flooring it so he can kill Jesse Plemons' character and the other characters. But it's the way it's shot, it's like everything is kind of quiet. The only thing that's loud is just the whimpering of Bohai and the whimpering of all the other characters. But then, and that's the only thing that you hear. But you would have, like, especially, Jesse Plemons' character, like he's a military guy, whatever, and the space is so open. Surely you would have heard this car coming from a mile away. It's so weird how it just shows up randomly at like 60 kilometers per hour and it hits the characters. I'm like, yeah, like I immediately didn't believe it. I was like, this is kind of a bullshit way of taking out these characters, but whatever, that's the way it happens. Arriving at the WF military camp in Charlottesville, the group grieves in different ways. Lee takes a photo of Sammy's corpse, but deletes it shortly after, because I guess even though she has a thick skin and she's willing to do whatever for photographs, she does have a bit of a heart, I suppose. Joel gets drunk and begins to become hysterical. That's the thing that I was talking about earlier. This random, weird outburst of emotion that doesn't quite make sense, because there's nothing that really attaches that character or any of those character traits to the character Sammy, so it doesn't really make sense to me. Jesse floats around the campsite. Two fellow reporters inform the group that the government's top generals have mostly surrendered, leaving Washington largely unprotected, and a WF invasion is imminent. They follow the WF into DC as Jesse's photography becomes increasingly risky. Meanwhile, Lee has a brief post-traumatic stress disorder episode and is unable to take pictures. This is like the moment that I was talking about when I was earlier on when I was reviewing this. Where I guess, it's a massive PTSD moment. Which I still think, I'm still standing by. I still think it's bizarre that she has this moment in like the final hour, I suppose, and it's just weird. Like, we don't see any of those cracks really at all throughout the film. So it's weird that it happens right at this moment where they're just about to siege the White House. In the besieged Capitol, the president's limousine unsuccessfully attempts to flee the White House grounds with an escort, but when the limousine crashes, Lee insinuates that the president is still in the building and leads her group inside. This is kind of weird. Okay, so I don't know why the militia, the WF soldiers, all that kind of stuff, would believe that those two limousines would come crashing out and that the president would be in there. Kind of a weird thing. Like you'd expect them to kind of think, okay, this is probably a decoy, it's probably a dummy, but maybe it's also part of their protocol to just check too. But just a little bit of a nitpick for me. And with Lee's character, I don't know if I kind of like this about this character, where she just has this moment where she's like, it's like she has like a third eye, you know, she kind of knows in her instincts, she knows that the president's not in there before anybody else knows and realizes. I'm kind of like, I don't know, a bit too convenient because she's like the main actor or main cast. A bit too convenient for my liking, but it is what it is. So the WF follow and face off the remaining Secret Service, including one in the press room, who unsuccessfully tries to negotiate safe passage of the president to Alaska or Greenland. When Jessie exposes herself to gunfire to get a photo of the ensuing West Wing gunfight, Lee pushes her to safety. Jessie photographs Lee as she is shot in the crossfire. Okay, just quickly on this scene, I think this scene was so corny. The way, like, it's the steps, the slow-mo, you could tell that this was going to lead to this point where she pushes her out of the way and she gets into the gunfire just to protect Jessie, and so Jessie can get the photograph for herself or whatever. I don't know really what's going on in her mind. I don't like. Look, okay, this is the way I would interpret this scene. It doesn't make sense. I'll say that right off the bat. It doesn't make sense because she does pretty much say to Jessie that, yeah, you can take the photo of me dying. You know, of course, that's kind of a given because she says that in the previous scenes. But how does she have the thought process to be able to do this in such a highly stressful scenario when moments ago she was going through a post-traumatic stress disorder episode? How that doesn't make any sense. Like that doesn't make sense at all for your character to be doing that. Come on, Alex Garland, what are you on about? like there's no logic to some of the decisions that the characters make. Come on. Like I don't like that shouldn't be a thing. But, you know, maybe this doesn't matter because the whole film, like I said before, doesn't really have a story as such. Like it's not have a story as such, and the characters are only driven by their ambition to go and get a last interview, which we don't even get anyway. So, like, to make a goal so prominent and the start of your journey and not achieving that goal just makes it even kind of worse for what your film turns out to be. So yeah, this whole pushing thing with the slow-mo thing with Lee pushing her out of the way and Jessie getting the photograph, it's so corny and cheesy and it just doesn't make sense. The WF soldiers capture the president in the Oval Office and Joel tells them to wait so he can get a quote. The president begs Joel for mercy, saying, "Don't let them kill me." Joel replies, "Yeah, that'll do," and then shoots the president. Jessie takes a photo of the president's summary execution, and smiling WF soldiers pose with his corpse. And that is literally the end of the recap and literally the final shot. No pun intended, the final shot of the film. Okay, so, you know, like I said before the recap, you know, this could be a way of, you know, going through the recap could be an opportunity for me to really change my mind and how I feel about this, maybe give it a more positive overview and rating. But no, I think going through that recap just kind of made my rating worse. And it just, you know, that's the benefit of going through a recap. In this podcast, the benefit is just really pulling strands apart and really thinking about trying to be as objective as possible of what the writers are trying to go for, what the director's trying to go for, And that's like sort of aside from all the other technical aspects of making a film. But yeah, it just kind of reaffirms my opinion on this and probably a worse rating for this film. Yeah. In summary, it could have been a great film. It could have had an awesome story about what would happen in a civil war situation. You know, they literally could have taken pointers out of Captain America Civil War, because that's a great political film about political disputes, ideological differences, and all of that leading up into the big physical battle. You know, the physical battle is earned in Captain America Civil War. In this film, is it earned? I don't know, because we don't really know how the Civil War started, so it's really hard to justify any of the violence and the war. You could say that, well, you justify it by just the opening statements from the president. It's like, not really. I mean, no. Yeah, like, having political ideological differences is large amounts of exposition in order for you to justify a war. So being plumbed into the middle of a civil war and this dystopian world is not a lot of validity there, because we don't know how and why. Yes, there are some statements made, but that doesn't justify like an all-out war, or at least in this kind of like isolated situation of a film. There's so many ways that he could have done this, but I would be really interested to know and to interview Alex Garland one day. You know, giving him my full honest opinion about this, because I don't, you know, there's no point in kind of, buttering up to people just because you want to, you know, talk to them. I think it's important for him to hear other people's opinions, and I would love to ask him, like, what was your thought process throughout this whole thing? What were you hoping the audience to gain by the end of this? And I don't really gain anything other than, yeah, I saw some beautiful cinematography and action set pieces. That's about it. So, my rating for this, out of 10, will have to be a 5 out of 10. Like, initially, before I was doing this review, I put it a 6 out of 10, but I got to peg it down a little bit. I don't think it deserves 6 out of 10. I think it deserves a 5 out of 10. And that's it. Review and recap, episode 85 for Civil War. So what did you think? Did you think this movie was amazing? And if you did think it was amazing, I'd love to hear what you had to say about it. I'd love to hear in the comments when I post this up on social media, maybe even DM us. You could also email us, which is legitcoolpodcast@gmail.com. Share your thoughts. I'd love to learn more about what you thought about the film. And if you are on my side, if you also think that this movie is terrible, I would also like to hear your opinion as to why you think it's terrible too. Do you think I'm sort of out of place here? Do you think I justified my opinion of this film? Let me know. Social media points, right? Social media tag @LegitCoolPodcast. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook, Legit Cool Podcast Movie Talk. Otherwise, if you forget that, then you can see all of these in the show notes on whatever listening platform you're listening from. Spotify is kind of the main area that we reside in. And a couple of things before I wrap up this episode. I want to give you a little teaser, a little bit of a preview promo kind of thing. We have a Lord of the Rings special coming up this week. This weekend is our first of 6 episodes. The 6 episodes are going to be comprised of 3 reviews and recaps, and they're going to be quite long form, longer than, I guess, usual episodes, because we are reviewing and recapping Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King, all extended editions, so there's going to be a lot of talk in those episodes. And then the 3 other episodes are special interviews, conversations with with crew from the Lord of the Rings, and we're so stoked, we're so rapt to have Shane Runge, Gino Acevedo, and Jamie Selkirk. And if you don't know who those guys are, look them up on the internet and you'll find some cool stuff, and we are so excited to have those guys for the Lord of the Rings special. With that being said, that is all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening. and we will catch you again on the podcast. Bye for now.